Hey, thanks for coming back, everybody. Um, I am one of your hosts, Michael. That's Reggie off to the side. In his social anxiety written, whatever. I don't know. Anyway, let me just start. Mm, A while ago, I was talking to a friend of mine. And when I say a while ago, I mean that it was a long time ago. She has two children, a boy and a girl. And in the course of our conversation, she was talking about the raising of her kids. Now, while she was talking to me about raising her kids, considering that I have none, I have no idea. I don't remember. Like I said, this was a while ago. So take that for what it's worth. Anyway, she was talking to me about her son. She mentioned her son. And while she was talking about him, she was talking about his responsibilities, specifically his responsibilities with regard to women. And she talked about how she's on him to honor, quote, gender roles. And that's the phrase that she used, and talked about how much she liked gender roles and how important she thought they were. And she talked about things like typical things like opening doors for women, pulling out chairs, and all of the things, well, many of the things that many of us that fit the demographic of this particular podcast were raised to do. And while she was talking about her son, and just to be clear, this isn't a topic that I brought up. I don't know how we got on the topic, but it's one that I don't usually bring up unless I'm intentionally trying to get information. But anyway, as she was talking about these things, I started to ask her about her daughter. And so I eventually did ask, I'm like, okay, I get what you're saying about your son, but what do you tell your daughter? And she started to talk generally about what she talks to her daughter about in terms of being an overall woman. But I had to interrupt her because I was asking specifically about gender roles and what her daughter's role was regarding what to do for men. In the same way, she went to all of those things that she was expecting that her son to do for girls and eventually women. And I wanted to know what she told her daughter about what her daughter's expectation should be about men. And like I said, she didn't really have an answer. And even though I pressed her for an answer, I got a lot of pivoting, almost as though she didn't really understand the question. But she really did understand the question. She just didn't really have an answer for it because she didn't really talk to her daughter about that. And as such, she doesn't talk to her daughter about her daughter's role in a relationship. And the reason that all of this is coming back to me now, and the reason that I'm talking about this to you all is because I'm hearing more and more debate about gender roles a lot lately. Actually, that's not true 100%. I'm actually hearing more and more debate about the roles of men, and whether it's sparked by some women talking about dating or not dating bus drivers, or Gabrielle Union talking about paying 50% of the bills. There have been several conversations lately about the roles of men in relationships. And I don't know if that's really fair or unfair, but what I do find interesting is that there isn't equal conversation about women's roles in relationships. And also, I find it interesting that a lot of the conversation, a lot of the conversation about the role of men is being conducted by women with little to no input from men. So a lot of the conversation about what men should be and do in relationships is dictated by women. And what's even more interesting, at least to me, is that these same women don't discuss their own roles in relationships. As a result, is leading more enlightened men to question what they're getting for all that's expected of them in relationships. And as someone that has asked many women what they give for what they expect, I find myself getting similar reactions and responses to the one that I got from my friend when I asked her about what she tells her daughter. Now, let me just take a break there. Let me just pause there because, hey, don't shoot the messenger. One of the things that I do when I talk about these topics on this podcast is I don't necessarily always express my views, even though a lot of the things that I say are reflective of my views. They're also reflective of the conversations that I have from men in general, which I find that a lot of people aren't having. It's interesting because as I sit here, I find myself having conversations with both men and women and getting different perspectives. And what I'm finding is that men and women aren't talking to each other about these things. And on the few occasions when I do find women and men talking about these things, it usually winds up in like basically a shout fest where people are talking past each other. They're not necessarily hearing each other. So it's interesting that I can ask questions of women and get their responses, and then ask men questions and get their responses, and get and have real conversations without expressing a bias one way or another. So so ladies, as you're listening to this, I'm a messenger. Now, it's not to say that I don't believe what I'm saying here. It's just saying that what I'm saying shouldn't be dismissed as a one-off by a bitter man or something like that. This is reflective of what a lot of guys are thinking these days. And I think it's important for women to hear this in the same ways that it's important for men to hear the things that women are saying. But that's all I'm saying. So getting back to our regularly scheduled program. So all of that conversation back and forth got me really thinking. Boys are taught early in their lives how to treat girls and women. In a previous episode of this podcast, I talked about Ryan Clark. And for people that don't know who Ryan Clark is, he's a former football player. Now he's a podcaster. He's also, for people listening to it in America, which is weird for me to have to even say that because people do listen overseas, which is weird to actually say that too. But for people that are familiar with the sports network ESPN, he also works for ESPN. So he's a former football player, podcaster, also works as a sports analyst for ESPN, the sports network in the United States. But I referenced him in a previous podcast episode because he was talking about being harder on his son and having to be harder on his son than his daughter because more, in his opinion, would be expected from his son. And part of that is because of how much more he'll have to contribute toward his relationships and eventual marriage if he chooses to get married than his daughter will. So boys are taught to do and be certain things in relationships, and is reinforced by society as boys grow into manhood. And what's really discussed in is what the ROI, return on investment, is for what's expected from these boys that eventually grow into men. And this brings me to little girls. I've spoken to many parents about, of course, me not being a parent myself, thank goodness. But I've spoken to many parents about what they tell their girls about what they're expected to give in relationships. And what I found a lot of are parents telling their daughters how to do things for themselves, be independent, be strong, do things like that, and what to expect from men, but not what to do for men. I've spoken to more parents that spend more time telling their girls more negative things about boys and men than how to conduct themselves for well-intentioned men. Parents to tell their daughters that men are only looking for sex, blah, 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 and to watch out for that because men are dogs and stuff like that, which is fair because a lot of boys are and a lot of men are. So I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. And a lot of that is reinforced by their experiences and things like that. But it also needs some balance there. And it doesn't, and the balance that I'm talking about are the lessons on how to treat a guy that you will fall in love with, the decent guys. And I've talked to women that were raised, I would talk to women that were raised by loving fathers that wind up being even worse. Because loving fathers often lead their daughters to expect their men in relationships to treat them the way that their fathers do. And when I say that, I mean that A father would do any and everything, at least good fathers will do any and everything. Well, I don't even know if I should say good fathers. Well-intentioned fathers, let's just say that. Well-intentioned fathers oftentimes will do any and everything for their daughters without expectation of anything in return. It's unconditional love to the highest degree. That's not realistic. And I'll go a step further and say that's not even healthy in relationships. With all of that, and let me just go a little bit deeper before I continue. When I say it's not healthy to go into a relationship expecting your man to be like your father any more than it's healthy to expect for a man's woman to be his mother. That gets kind of creepy, and it's creepy on both ends. A mama's boy is seen as a bad thing, while you want a man to have a good relationship with his mother. Uh, you want there to be a line there, not to cross over into being a mama's boy. But for some reason, being a daddy's girl seems to be more accepted, and it really shouldn't be because it has the same negative, it can have the same negative consequences that being a mama's boy does. And so we need to get away from all of that. That's not healthy, not for long-term sustainable relationships. So, with all of that in mind, it's not surprising that when I ask my friend what she tells her daughter, or ask a woman what she gives in a relationship, that they don't have good answers. Because unless because unlike boys to men, many girls to women weren't taught what to do for men, then having it reinforced throughout their lives. Women just didn't. Some women, a lot of women didn't have those experiences. And while I understand that there are many women listening to this and that are ready to fight me because you see yourselves as givers, and I'm not saying that you're not, but men have special needs in relationships in the same way that you all have special needs in relationships. And many women still believe that, excuse me, and many women still believe that all that a man needs is sex and he should be good. But it's so much deeper than that, especially as we get older and fit the demographic of this podcast. But how would you know what a man needs if it's never been taught to you? How would you know what a man needs if it's never been reinforced? How would you know if it's not debated every other day on social media the way it is debated about what a man should do for women? Pay the bills, not pay the bill, pay the mortgage, and all that stuff. And how would you know if you don't ask? I've been dating for so long, and I've had so few conversations what I need about what I need in a relationship. Seems like that would be a standard question for someone that you're interested in, but oh well. So if girls weren't taught how to treat a man and were only taught what to expect from a man, it definitely explains a lot of this conflict between men and women. And it explains the shift in mindset that men are currently experiencing. More men are starting to question what they're getting from relationships and going into relationships with expectations. They're rejecting the idea of being raised to give and give, only to die with a broken back 10 years before their wives because of stress. It's funny because I've had conversations with many women, and those conversations, I've talked to women who talk about, I go out, I have to make decisions all day at work and all of this stuff. I don't want to have to come home and make decisions. So the question is, who's supposed to make those decisions? And to those women that have said that to me, it's usually the guy that's supposed to make those decisions. So if you go out all day and you make decisions, and then you have to come home and make more decisions, and that's kind of taxing on you, wouldn't it be just as taxing for a guy to have to go out to work, make decisions all day, and then come home and have to make decisions? But for some reason, it's expected of men because that has been what has been instilled in boys to do, even at the expense of their own health and eventual death, which oftentimes is before a woman. Now, there are other contributing factors as to why men die before women, and that number is starting to even out because women are starting to die earlier because of heart disease and things like that, and the same stresses that men are having. So it speaks to how we need to work together and get rid of that mindset of what a man should do versus a woman should do. Now, also, there are strong, independent women out here that make good money that feel that they shouldn't be responsible for making financial contributions to the relationship. Or if they do make financial contributions to the relationship, it's only when they feel like it. Men are starting to question that, and as a result, they're starting to push back on that. And if that's how women were raised, and that behavior has been reinforced all their lives, it's not surprising that when a man pushes back on those ideals, a woman would get defensive. Women have those lofty expectations of men to do more for them, and that mindset didn't just develop out of thin air. It was instilled in them, right or wrong, and is being constantly reinforced. I can speak for myself. It was instilled in me at a young age. I told a story back when Reggie was coming on. Yes, that Reggie, about how my mother was talking to a friend of hers, and the friend of hers was talking to me about dating and talking about how a woman can pay every now and then, it's fine. And my mother chopped her off at the knees and was like, no, you, she never pays. You always pay. And that was instilled in me. And it's reinforced because that's what women expect. And as such, I talk about other people and stuff like that. I'm one of those people that starts to question certain things about that. And Reggie, talked about that as well. Yeah. So those things are being reinforced. And the consequences of that installation are that men and women aren't liking each other. So women have these impressions that were instilled on them or in them. Men are like starting to question those things. Men are starting to push back. Women are like, hold up a second, you're just soft then if you don't want to do these things that I've been raised to believe that a man should do. And men are like, no, I'm not soft. I just want to have a happy life the same way that you do. And that's where a lot of the butting of heads kind of starts. Now, with all of that said, there's quite a bit of generalization in everything that I've said up to this point, and I'm sure ladies out there listening will have no problem pointing that out to me, but I acknowledge it. So, and to add some brightness to that, I was talking to Nicole, friend of the show, um, who has participated in our Ask a Woman segments before, and I was talking to her about this thing, and she's Caribbean. And when I ran my philosophy, everything that I just mentioned to you all in this episode, when I presented that to her to get her opinion, because I like to get opinions, like I said, I talk to men and women. While she didn't necessarily disagree with what I was saying, she did make the point that a lot of this is cultural. Again, she's Caribbean, and she mentioned that her Caribbean parents instilled in her that a woman cooks, cleans, serves her man however she can, and that is her responsibility. And while many women were taught that growing up, some women have chosen to reject those things as they've gotten older. I hear more and more women talk about how, nah, they're not doing that stuff. That's not their role. If they have to go out and work, they shouldn't have to come home and cook and clean as well. But that same woman or some women can say, well, me and the man both work, but the man should contribute more to the household financially or whatever. So, but they shouldn't have to contribute more around the household. So again, it just leads to more and more of the butting heads when, what we really need is balance. Eh, But Nicole pointed out that in her culture, that's a way of life that is not just instilled, is reinforced, specifically about what women are expected to contribute to the household, to the relationship, to the marriage. Yeah. And she pointed out that that's the case in not just Caribbean culture, but in many cultures around the world. And while that gave me hope, it kind of saddened me to realize that a lot of these issues about expectations and what we've been taught is confined to American culture. And more specifically, as I talk about this Black American culture. And as a Black American that is consistently given more than I've received in relationships, then became resentful and subsequently left those relationships. It's just tough. It's just tough. But to put a button on it, we need to be better in how we raise our kids. While daughters need to watch out for guys with bad intentions, obviously, they also need to talk. They also need to be taught that happy, healthy relationships require happiness from both partners. That old happy wife, happy life stuff is way outdated. And sons need to be taught to have expectations and to be open about their expectations, both mentally and physically. I know that most of you are big proponents of chemistry and all that mess. Of course, I don't agree with chemistry, but most of you agree with it. But you need to start looking at these relationships as more transactional than chemistry based and traditional expectations based on relationships that you don't even know the details of and all of that mess. In real life, no one makes demands without expecting to pay a price. In real life, conversely, no one writes a check without expecting a service that matches the amount of that check. Only in dating do we have this weird logic that we apply to expect more from someone that we're giving, or to expect to give more than we receive. A lot of people talk about how there's so much piss in the pool and talk about how dating is so whack and all of this stuff, but a lot of it is because it's so out of balance and people are resentful of it, and we were just raised to be a certain way and to expect a certain thing. And what a lot of us need to do is realize in a lot of ways that, and this isn't just in dating, but a lot of the ways that we were raised were kind of BS. Hey, yeah, yeah. If if you fit the demographic of this podcast in terms of age, and you don't look back at your childhood and think not everything, but think some things that you were taught were outdated at best, and I'm being kind. Yeah, you really need to reevaluate that because the world is not the same now than it was when our parents were around or are around, as this plane flies over my house. Yeah, so really, we need to adapt our mindset to today and not just think that something that may have worked and we don't even know if it really worked back in our parents' and grandparents' days still apply today. So, only in dating. Anyway, that's that for that. People that listen to this regularly know that oftentimes we usually end with death and divorce. We have both today. Let's get to the divorce. Kevin Costner, star of the television show Yellowstone, and I don't know why I can't talk this morning, but he is divorcing his wife Christine Baumgartner after 18 years of marriage. He is 68 years old. Now, part of the reason to talk about divorce is because this is a relationship podcast, obviously. But like I've said in the past many times, I'm just amazed at how people of a certain age wind up getting divorced. How even after a certain age, you don't just settle into life and settle into being with that person. How how you still find yourself restless, and you still want out after all of this time. It just boggles my mind. But at 68 years old, uh, how you're like, I don't want to be married anymore. But I will say that his wife, especially after 18 years, but his wife is the one who allegedly is pursuing the divorce. And it's partially because, rumor has it, because of his work on the TV show and his commitments that infringe on their marriage. After 18 years, maybe it's just me being Pollyanna or just being overly idealistic. One of the things I say you shouldn't be. I just feel like after 18 years, and then you add the time that they spent dating before marriage, you would just kind of be in sync with that person. But obviously not. And that's the reason I keep bringing up these divorces that constantly happen after all of these years of marriage. I will say one thing about Kevin Costner, though. This is a second marriage, and the last marriage lasted for 16 years. So I tell you what, when he jumps into the pool, he really jumps into the pool. 16 years, 18 years. And then usually when I hear things like that, long marriage, I think that the person might have just jumped out of one and then immediately jumped into another. But nah, not in Kevin's case. He got divorced from his first wife in 94 and then went 10 years before before marrying his second wife. Yeah, so it seems like he's legitimately invested, but who knows? I know nothing about the man. Well, I know about the man, but only what I read. I don't know the man. But I do find that interesting. 16 years, divorce, 10-year waiting period, marriage, 18 years, divorce. Who knows? Something about them. You just can't get past that 18-year, that 20-year hump. Oh, well, it is what it is. In transitioning to death, Tina, which one death to another, Tina Turner died. And by now, I'm guessing that people all around the world have heard about this. So I'm not like I'm breaking news here. She was 83 years old and she lived a long life. She's from Nutbush, Tennessee, in the good old United States of America. And she died in Switzerland. She wound up, they say, renouncing her US citizenship. I wouldn't say it's that, but because it wasn't like she was anti-American, she moved to Europe because that's where the money was. She grew to be a star here in the United States, but it never measured to the star that she was in Europe. So she wound up moving to Europe, and then she wound up meeting and marrying a man that lived in Switzerland. And so, yeah, there's no need to pay double taxes. And it's one of the things that she mentioned in the interview. Yeah, because for people that don't know, if you leave a country, part of the whole thing in renouncing that other country is that if you keep dual citizenship, you have to pay taxes in both places. And who's signing up for that? And so, yeah, she chose to become a full-time European. And the reason that I bring that up is because I'm guessing that I've never been to Nutbush, Tennessee. I've only heard of Nutbush, Tennessee because of Tina Turner. I'm imagining that Nutbush, Tennessee isn't a place where a lot of people are born and wind up leaving Nutbush, Tennessee. But looking at her life for the good and the bad, and there was a whole lot of bad, especially in those early years, when talking about her marriage and what she went through in that marriage, it just speaks to how in her 83 years, you can say a lot of things about her, but one thing you can say is that she lived. And it's what we all should do. And a lot of us are stuck in our prisons in our own Nutbush Tennessees. And for a lot of us, that Nutbush Tennessee is in our head, you know, and that's what keeps us from living the full potential of our lives. And a lot of us need to start thinking more like a Tina Turner. Obviously, we can't sing like Tina Turner, can't dance like Tina Turner, but we can find our own thing and pursue that and get the most out of whatever time that we have here. So when I think about Tina Turner and think about her life, that's what I think about. Just, how, hey, we all need to do what we need to do to squeeze every ounce of life out of it, you know, instead of just being stuck. So, God rest Tina Turner. Life, man, as my mother used to say, it'll kill you. But that's it for me. That's it for Reggie. Reggie, you want to come say something to the people? What's funny is Reggie was actually here last week. He came to visit and hung out here for a few days. And for some reason, some kind of way, I couldn't get him to be on the show then either. But that's neither here nor there. Shout out to my guy Reggie, co-host of the show, and shout out to you all. Thank you all for listening. I'm so appreciative. Still weird that anybody listens to this, but people do. Anyway, have a good day. Have a good weekend. Have a good week, regarding depending on what you're on right now as you're listening to this. Have a good night, depending on when you're listening to this and all that good stuff. And hey, yeah, yeah. Anyway, bye.